God and Evil, The Problem Solved by Gordon Haddon Clark. Foreword. One of the perennial objections to Christianity is the problem of evil. The problem may be stated as follows. If God is all good, and if God is all powerful, why are sin and suffering in the world? Surely, if God were both all good and all powerful, he would rid the world of evil, or better yet, would not have allowed sin and suffering to appear in the first place. But since evil does exist, it must be that 1. God is not all good, even though he is almighty, and so he does not wish to end sin and suffering. Or 2, God is all good, but not almighty, and so he cannot rid the world of sin and suffering, no matter how good he is. Or 3, God is neither all good nor all powerful, and so neither wishes to nor can rid the world of evil. Or 4, there is no God at all. Or 5, there is more than one God, none of whom is omnipotent, and one or more of whom may be evil. Or 6, God is impersonal, and the ascription of intelligence or purposes to it is a pathetic fallacy. Whatever alternative is chosen, the existence of the God of the Bible is disproved, so the argument goes. For the Bible speaks of one God who is both good and all-powerful. Theologians have attempted to answer this argument for centuries. They have offered two major counter-arguments. First, they have denied the existence of sin and suffering, which of course contradicts the Bible. Second, they have asserted that man has free will, which also contradicts the Bible. The free will argument has been the most popular proposed solution to the problem of evil, but it actually seeks to solve the problem by agreeing to one of the problem's alternatives. The free will argument concedes that God is not almighty, for the free will of man can and does frustrate God's will. The free will argument is really a capitulation to and an agreement with the unbeliever. For like the unbeliever, the defender of free will is left with a God who may be good, but who is not omnipotent, and therefore he is not and cannot be the good God of the Bible. Now there is a solution to the problem of evil, and it has been staring theologians in the face for millennia. Almost all of them have been blind to it. The solution is found in the scriptures themselves, in the very description of God that the unbeliever twists into an argument against God. Dr. Clark set forth that solution in a British journal in 1932 when he was 29 years old, and then he published it again 30 years later in his book, Religion, Reason, and Revelation, from which this essay is taken. It is only in the scriptures that the solution to the problem of evil is found. No other proposed solution solves the problem of evil. Counterfeit Christianities, such as Arminianism and Romanism, cannot solve the problem. In fact, the problem of evil proves those counterfeits to be false. Their proponents do not understand the sovereignty of God, nor the origin of moral law, including the concepts of good and evil, nor the basis for human responsibility. Consequently, the unbeliever, wielding the problem of evil as his weapon, has slain Arminianism and Romanism. But the problem of evil has no force against biblical Christianity, which denies assumptions on which the argument is founded. 1. That the concept of goodness has some meaning apart from God and is somehow superior to God. 2. That God is benevolent toward all his creatures. And 3, that God's actions are not by definition just, righteous, and good. Once one understands the biblical doctrine of God, the problem of evil is properly seen as an argument that slays lesser gods, counterfeit gods, but cannot even bruise the God of the Bible. John W. Robbins. God and evil. In the background of every religious worldview, there stands a frightening specter. An author may refrain from mentioning it. He may hope that his public will forget to think about it. But no position is complete, and none can be unhesitatingly accepted until it makes a clear pronouncement on the problem of evil, of man's first disobedience and the fruit, of that forbidden tree whose mortal taste brought death into the world and all our woe. Sing, heavenly muse. It is not, however, the sonorous phrases of a great poet, nor even the inspiration of a muse that we need. Careful thought, clean-cut definitions, and consistency to the end are the prerequisites of progress. The aim of this chapter is to face the question of evil squarely, without dodging, and to show that whereas various other views disintegrate at this point, the system known as Calvinism, and expressed in the Westminster Confession of Faith, offers a satisfactory and completely logical answer. Historical exposition. To bring the matter into sharp focus and to set forth the main difficulties, a representative selection will be made from the discussions of history. In antiquity, evil was almost always viewed from the standpoint of some sort of religion. At the present time, God is more frequently left out of the picture. Although the presuppositions of this chapter are thoroughly theistic, something will be said of non-theistic views, if only to indicate that the problem of evil does not disappear with the acceptance of secularism. The problem, as it has usually been considered, is terrifyingly simple. How can the existence of God be harmonized with the existence of evil? There are plenty of evils. One of the Soviet secret police is quoted as boasting that he had so refined torture that he could break every bone in a man's body without killing him. And is there a God who looks down on this from on high? By those who were religiously inclined, this enigma has been faced in fear and trembling. The irreligious, Voltaire, for example, with a cry of triumph have spat it forth like the poison of asps. But whatever the form, the issue is inescapable. How can the existence of God be reconciled with the existence of evil? In early Christian times, Lactantius reports its prevalence. If God is good and wants to eliminate sin, but cannot, he is not omnipotent. But if God is omnipotent and can eliminate sin, but does not, he is not good. God cannot be both omnipotent and good. Although the Christian of God as omnipotent aggravates the difficulty, man's trouble with evil, his intellectual trouble with evil, did not begin with Christianity. Pain, disease, calamities, injustice, and woe have impressed people of every religion. Some religions, of which is one, concluded that the universe must be the work of two independent, conflicting deities. Neither the good God nor the evil God is omnipotent, and neither as yet has destroyed the other. On the surface, this seems to account for the mixture of good and evil in the world. But such ultimate and irreducible dualisms give rise to further riddles, which many philosophers have thought equally insoluble. Plato, in his Republic, attempted to account for evil by the assumption that God is not the cause of everything, but only of a few things. Few because our evils far outnumber our goods. In the Timaeus, he was not quite so pessimistic, but he still held that there is an eternal and chaotic space which control. To the end, therefore, it must be said, Plato retained an unreconciled dualism. Aristotle, because his philosophy is so completely irreligious, is somewhat an exception in antiquity. He conceived God in such a way that his relation to evil, or his relation to the moral endeavors of men, hardly mattered. The unmoved mover is in a sense the cause of all motion. But instead of being an active cause, he causes motion by being the object of the world's desire. He exercises no voluntary control over history. Though he is constantly thinking, he does not seem to think about the world. Or at most, he knows only a part of the past and nothing whatever of the future. Naturally, the great Christian philosopher Augustine grappled with the difficulty. Under Neoplatonic influence, he taught that all existing things are good. Evil, therefore, does not exist. It is metaphysically unreal. Being non-existent, it can have no cause, and God, therefore, is not the cause of evil. When a man sins, it is a case of his choosing a lower good instead of a higher good. This choice, too, has no efficient cause, although Augustine assigns to it a deficient cause. In this way, God was supposed to be absolved. Augustine admittedly was a great Christian and a great philosopher. Later in the chapter, more will be said about him, but here he was at his worst. Deficient causes, if there are such things, do not explain why a good God does not abolish sin and guarantee that men always choose the highest good. This matter of evil is not an outmoded antiquity that evaporated with Zoroaster, Aristotle, or Augustine. The 20th century cannot evade it. Therefore, a few illustrations will be selected from contemporary writers. Today, however, much of the discussion is secular in nature. Either religion is ignored, or in some cases, Christianity is pointedly attacked. Lucius Garvin, John L. Mothershead, and Charles A. Bayliss have each written a textbook on ethics. These books are fairly well known in American colleges today. Garvin has a very short section on theological ethics, with a conclusion that suggests that God is not particularly important. In the second textbook, the index has no entry at all for God, and in the third, it seems that God is mentioned only on one page. Nevertheless, secular ethics, although it will pay no attention to omnipotence, must still consider determinism and must say something about responsibility. An example of this type of thought will elucidate some details of the main argument as well as serve as part of an historical selection. Professor Bayliss of Duke University gives what many people will believe to be a very plausible argument. If determinism is true, he says, then a person's decisions reflect his character. The man's character causes and explains his action. Accordingly, if we know the particular weaknesses of a man's character, we may be able, by praise, promises, threats, or punishments, to alter his character, improve the man, and so produce better decisions. Blame and punishment, therefore, which have the effect of reforming a person, are justifiable. But retributive punishment will not be justifiable if determinism is true. The remote causes of a man's character are far in the past and were never under his control. Therefore, he is not responsible for them. Therefore, retributive punishment is illegitimate. Dr. Bayliss further insists that indeterminism also renders retributive punishment illegitimate. And what is worse, indeterminism can provide only a dubious justification for corrective punishment. Another professor at Duke University furnishes an example of those who pointedly attack Christianity. The argument comes from An Introduction to the Philosophy of Religion by Dr. Robert Leete Patterson. To refer evil to a corrupt human nature transmitted from Adam, Professor Patterson brands as, quote, an odious doctrine, which Pelagius, to his honor, anticipated modern liberals in rejecting, unquote. Besides, there is a previous question. The author asked, quote, If it be as easy for God to create good men as to create evil men, why did not God create all men good? Unquote. To suppose that God created the good and the evil for his own glory, to bestow his love on the good and his wrath on the evil, is to lower God to the level of the most degenerate human tyrant. Such an idea must be decisively rejected, for the author insists God cannot be thought of as immoral. Even if we believe, in the absence of all evidence, that every occurrence of evil is essential to the realization of a greater good, the fact that God could not produce the good without the previous evil indicates that God's power is limited. Today, then, as in the past, the existence of evil is a crucial question, and the answer frequently includes the idea of a limited deity. Many modern philosophers, such as John Stuart Mill, William Pepperell Montague, and Georgia Harkness, as well as the accept a finite God. But it must be clearly understood that this idea is incompatible with Christianity. The Bible presents God as omnipotent, and only on this basis can a Christian view of evil be worked out. The idea of a finite God, although it is a non-Christian expedient, has nonetheless a certain amount of merit by reason of its honesty. Professing Christians are not always so frank. In a certain Christian college, the head of the Bible department used to tell his students not to discuss the subject. Indeed, this was rather clearly the policy of the institution, for the subject is controversial. It is also unedifying, and the professor should have added, it is embarrassing, for when some pointed questions were asked him, he grew irritated and replied, I don't like the kind of questions you ask. Perhaps such colleges think that if evil is never mentioned, the students will never hear about it. They seem to forget that the secular enemies of Christianity will soon remind them and ask them some controversial, unedifying, and embarrassing questions. Such an attitude of secrecy did not characterize the great Christian theologians, Augustine, Aquinas, Calvin. We may perhaps not agree with this one or that one, but like the modern secularists, they were open and honest. Before we drop the idea of a finite God, however, there's one interesting consideration to mention. If the mixture of good and evil in the world rules out the possibility of a good and omnipotent God, and if the extent of good in the world hardly allows the assumption of an infinite evil demon, it still does not follow that there is a finite good God. A finite evil God is an equally acceptable conclusion. Instead of saying that God does the best he can, but being limited, he cannot quite eliminate the evil in the world, we could just as well say that God does the worst he can, but being limited, he cannot quite eradicate the forces of good which oppose his will. Evidently, therefore, the advocates of a finite God arrive at their conclusion more by emotion than by reason.